Hey, this is the Deflating Atheism 1K subs special. I decided just to use this as an opportunity to reconnect with some people I've kind of neglected on my channel. So I've had some hangouts with people, and then I haven't talked to them in a year. So I kind of use this as an opportunity to talk to some people. And we have Christopher Lansdown. I've been having trouble with your name for some reason. Christopher Lansdown. Max Kolbe, as always. And we have Wayne Philmore here. He has his mic muted, but I assume he'll be joining us later. And I am Deflating Atheism. So I guess you guys can introduce yourselves. So, Chris?
Yeah, well, I'm Christopher. My channel's missing the mark. We do more than... I think we did 2 hangouts a long time ago, didn't we?
Yeah.
But... yeah, and have other things eventually to collaborate on, but
yes.
Yeah, my channel's more philosophy, theology. Although I've done a lot of looking at atheism, which a lot of atheists interpret to be like trying to talk them into or out of something when I'm just looking at it. But in any event,
yes. And your channel is called
Missing the Mark, as I said.
And of course, we all know Max.
Hey, Max here again, Max Kolbe. Probably best known for the controversial, inflammatory Escaping Atheism project. Not that the Deflating Atheism project has any shortage of being sarcastic. It's interesting. We've been kind of talking around it, but we've gone ahead and done it. We're going forward. We're launching a second project. The Escaping Atheism project will be a separate project or a sub-project. The bigger project is going to be called Little Orthodox, and it's going to be more directly ministry-based. We've already secured the domain, littleorthodox.org, I guess. And we'll be talking generally about Orthodox Christianity, which will annoy some of the strictest Orthodox, but we want to introduce this topic broadly to an audience that doesn't know anything about any of it. It's very obvious that a lot of people think Christianity is read the Bible, believe what it says, and there. And
I've read your book.
I think there's problems with that approach, and there's other approaches, and so we'll be talking about that. So that's what we're up to now.
I was just going to say, you can't do anything on the internet without somebody being angry at you. I've got enough people in my videos who angrily agree with me. I mean, they often don't quite realize it, but I've had plenty of people like angrily tell me about something or other. I'm like, that's what I said.
Yeah. You didn't say it forcefully enough, I don't think. because you have a very kind of like easy peasy laid back style, which
I suppose
contrast to me and Mike.
Christopher really is like such a nice guy compared to either me or you. Actually. Really. Although I've noticed he's been developing a more rapier-like wit. Online atheists will do that to you.
Yeah, I mean, I try different things, and there are people whom subtlety is very much lost on them. Mm-hmm. So I mean, there are people I don't mind telling, like, you're not all that bright, and you are remarkably uneducated, and you will do a lot better by going and trying to become educated.
Yes.
And I'll say it that bluntly, because anything more complex than that or more subtle than that is very much lost. And they don't believe me. And unfortunately, too, one thing I'm missing, because I'd love if I could find some well-educated agnostics. It's a very unstable position, of course, a well-educated agnostic, or well-educated atheist, for that matter, frankly. I mean, it's you can only be so well-educated and stay an atheist. But in any event, Nietzsche accepted, because there's so many...
trigger warning.
But the thing is, I would love... to have a few of these people, just to refer people to, like, you're not very competent in reading. Here, pay this atheist over here to teach you how to understand what you read, please.
Yeah.
And the one time I tried that was actually with a friend who had then, in the interim, he had become Catholic by the time I had made that recommendation. So. Yeah.
The problem with a lot of atheists is that, this is going to sound so cliched, they don't know what they don't know. Is that seriously, they think they can sweep away a millennia-old philosophical arguments by doing a Google search for, first cause argument debunked. they don't understand that there's a whole millennia-long body of literature, dedicated to these topics.
Well, do you actually get ones? It's a funny because for me, atheists bifurcate into the tiny percentage who are fairly well educated, and the majority who basically, by and large, would tell me that there were results to that Google search. They wouldn't even bother looking them up and like regurgitating the results to that Google search to me, because like, why haven't you admitted that it's been debunked?
Yes.
It hasn't.
All the time. I'm looking very dark. Yes, they say, oh, there are YouTube videos that debunk that. Hey, Wayne, there are YouTube videos. It's like, okay, well, you can find YouTube videos saying that the moon landing was faked. That does not prove anything.
Have you had this one yet? The other way, though? Like, I'll say somebody has evidence for that assertion, and I will link to a book or a YouTube video which I know to be good and to have copious good references, like one of Inspiring Philosophies, because his stuff's always referenced up the yin yang. And the instant response in less than 30 seconds is, a book? You want me to read a book? How does that prove anything? A YouTube video? How does that prove anything?
I guess Harry Potter is true. That's a book, too. I mean...
Literally, that's like, how ballsy do you have to be? Oh, sorry, I swore. I mean, really, how ballsy do you have to be? Really, it's the "that's not evidence" trick. I mean, really, just give me any example, and I'll say that's not evidence.
And the new, it's not new, but the new kind of a slogan that's come down the line. I actually told Chris about this, and he had not heard it before, which surprised it. Is arguments are not evidence.
Oh.
Evidence.
I actually the really ironic thing about that, because technically, of course, an argument is not evidence. An argument is the thing by which you know the evidence, what conclusion the evidence supports. Except, ironically, for the argument from contingency and necessity, since the argument itself is contingent and therefore demonstrates the existence of a contingent thing, which is necessary to satisfy the argument. So that argument is in fact evidence merely by being contingent. All other arguments, of course, how you know what the evidence points to. Like you see a knife with a fingerprint on it, you then make the argument that this guy's fingerprint on the knife shows that he committed the crime. That's what the argument does. It links the evidence to the conclusion.
Here's what I've been just realizing is that the screaming need. See, the whole thing with street epistemology is that anybody who's not, you don't have to be very bright to pick it up.
Yeah. That's what we were talking about before. It's basically a script to follow. In fact, they have an app. A
lot of these
street to me is more like Christian precept.
That is also very script based. Yes.
Yes. Well, presuppositional apologetics, to the extent that I've seen it, I mean, I admit that I use some of its methods, although I haven't studied it in depth. Because I do, it's very obvious to me that there's a God. And so once that becomes apparent to you, it's like you can flip the script and simply become skeptical of the atheist and the atheist position. And skepticism is not necessarily at all the best way to know something, but we have a young generation of people who've been taught that being skeptical is how you look smart.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things that just immediately works is just go right after every atheist presupposition.
Yes.
And also, if they like, they'll say something like arguments are not evidence. Well, that's fine. Just take the traditional arguments for the existence of God, whether it's the argument from motion or the argument from order or any of those, and just phrase it differently. Don't phrase it as an argument. The argument from intelligibility is one of the things that got me, and it's just like, I don't have to phrase it that way. I can say, well, we live in an intelligible universe. Explain that, please.
Yes.
It's not an argument anymore. It's an observation. The universe is intelligible. That requires an explanation.
Well, if you really want to piss them off, by the way, just invite them to give you evidence that they're honest. They want you to take it on faith. Yeah. I point this out to a bunch of people. Like, okay, I invite you to give me evidence that you're honest. That you're asking this question honestly, or that you actually accept evidence. I mean, do you want me to take it on faith that you accept evidence?
Yeah. By the way, Chris, I strongly disagree with something you said before, but we could discuss that later. But yeah, what my main thing, and of course you guys know, I have my thing, and I can't say I have much luck, but it's good just for triggering the atheist. Is that 98% of the time, atheists will fall into they will bifurcate, as Christopher Lansdown says. They'll fall into one of two camps. They'll say, atheist number one, God does not exist. They say, well, why should I think God does not exist? No, I have to prove anything. I'm an atheist. The other atheist, I'm not like that other Gnostic atheist. I'm not afraid to say I don't know, and the reason I'm not afraid to say I don't know is because there is no evidence for God. You say, okay, why should I think there is no evidence for God? No, I have to prove anything. I'm an atheist. So in either case, you end up with a claim, with a knowledge claim that they are both unwilling and unable to demonstrate. So that's the easiest way. I mean, for me, it's just. Yes, just knuckleheaded skepticism. Just ram through it, and you're gonna get them at some claim, and that they try to get out of the burden of proof by redefining what a claim is.
Yeah, or occasionally you'll see them say no. I've seen atheists on Twitter at least say this is not a claim. I parried that at one point by just as being a pretend atheist, and I parried that by making the end of every claim that I made no claimo. If you remember the old no homo thing.
No homo, yes.
Yeah. So some of them are practically at the level of saying no claimo, but really funny too, as I pointed out to some guy, because one of the problems with the whole like they always say making a positive claim too. If you make a positive claim, then you have the burden of proof. But virtually all positive claims are convertible into negative claims, and virtually all negative claims are convertible into positive claims. If you say that there are infinitely many prime numbers, that's convertible into the claim that there is no largest prime number.
Yes.
So the same. I pointed out to one guy that, well, you're at least making the implicit claim that it is possible the world could exist without God. Mm-hmm. And he said, no, I'm not. Okay, so you don't believe in God, but you don't even think it's possible that the world could exist without God.
Hey, we got a couple of commenters here. You want me to read a couple of the comments? Okay. Well, first, sorry, we seem like we are ignoring you guys. Let's see. Innovation HQ says, please expose Jacqueline Glenn, to which my response is, ew, no, please don't.
Doesn't she do that herself? Isn't that her shtick?
Oh my God! Have you seen her Instagram account?
No.
She's paying out of pocket. She is paying out of pocket to have professional photographs taken of her like every other day. It is such a vanity project.
I don't know what to tell you.
Puns on expose her aside. I assume this is referring to. I don't know very much about her. In fact, all I really know is an agnostic friend of mine who pointed me to a video of hers, in which in the first minute she said first that atheism is not a position; it's merely a lack of belief, and then answered the second question with, "Well, you can't hate somebody that you don't think exists." And so, in just a moment, she then claimed that God, based her argument on God not existing.
Yes.
And as he put it, she couldn't go 17 seconds without this.
Yes. Yes.
That's the best I can do. And thank you, Tomas.
Yes. You've debunked Jacqueline Glenn. It's in a YouTube video.
The atheist women are all very interesting whenever you look at them. I mean, I don't want to generalize too much, but they all seem to have a large base of fanboys who are sexually obsessed following them. They just all seem like they do. And I mean, more so than most. I mean, what can you say? Here, Scotty Phillips says, Jacqueline Glenn is a straw manning, cherry-picking, plagiarizing idiot. There's no need to waste time making a video on her.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I can verify the plagiarizing part, but I mean, straw manning and cherry picking.
That's very much verifiable, yes.
Oh, it is? Okay, I'm not aware. Okay,
yeah,
I'm not aware.
Well, a friend of mine who saw some of the people who were doing this, it was other atheists who went after her, because she would take arguments from like Matt Dillahunty and other people and just use them as if they were her own, like word for word, like reading them off or having memorized them or something. And there's a guy who went through making a video, another atheist, about this, and he was asked, like, how are you able to, like, you know, find the sources so quickly? And he said, oh, it was pretty easy. Anytime she said anything that sounded vaguely intelligent, I just, you know, threw a sentence of that into Google and right up the source popped.
Yeah. This is my theory about that. I think all of her videos are ghost written. So I think for a person who doesn't actually have to put their face on video, it's much easier to cop some other text from somewhere else. I think like, well, whenever, like, she did her little "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" videos, like, she did not write this herself. So I think all her videos are ghost written, and her ghost writers get lazy, and so they rip it off from other atheist YouTubers.
That would make sense. You know, the funny thing about the whole plagiarism thing is, outside of academia, originality is not important. I mean, nobody, you know, in academia, yes, it matters. Outside of that, if you say, as famous person said, and then quote them, nobody cares. Nobody thinks less of you for that. I quote Chesterton all the time. And, you know, I'll hold up, you know,
even in academia, it would be fair use, you know.
Yeah, I mean, like, you just have to actually say, like, as somebody or other said, and then say what they said, and presto, you're not plagiarizing. Quote marks, basically, are the only thing required to not be a plagiarist. And nobody thinks the worst of me. She also apparently plagiarized, like, one of her commenters, which is bizarre on a number of, I mean, in the level of bad judgment on a number of levels, including interacting with your commenters is the sort of thing that would bring you bonus points with your audience. So saying, like, as this wonderful audience member of mine said, and then read the damn thing out, and your audience will love you more for this. Why would she? Again,
I think that can be explainable by the fact that all her videos are ghost written.
Hey, can I share
explanatory power?
Let me make a book recommendation here. Can you see my screen share? And I've got a book flashed up here from Amazon. The New Atheist Threat, The Dangerous Rise of Secular Extremists. It does relate, believe it or not. This is an interesting book, because C.J. Werleman here is himself an atheist and a real Islam apologist, over the top, so in my view. But whatever, he does do it. But he's an atheist. He's tied in with that whole secular talk network, actually, but he's critical of other atheists. And this is a good book, actually. You'll notice it's only got 2-star reviews.
Yeah, it got swamped with atheists. Yeah,
it actually got swamped with fake reviews from atheists. And in fact, in the book, he says that's going to happen.
Yeah.
After I read it, it's like many of the reviews, they clearly didn't read it, and they're not being honest about the contents. Werleman himself did get caught on a plagiarism thing once. He apologized for it, but he also reveals, you know, who else had a plagiarism problem? Christopher Hitchens. And it's well documented. He's not the only one who's documented it. Hitchens in his book God Not Great actually cribbed a couple of pages straight out of manifesto from the League of the Militant Godless. It's
wow.
Yes, about like a page and a half of God Is Not Great. It's just
from his old Marxist days. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a Marxist.
Yes.
I think. Trotskyite technically, but.
Trotskyite, yeah, and don't get me started on Trotskyite. I think Trotskyite might be the best word to use for anybody who claims to be a communist who's not like that. Yeah, put my brand of communist in charge, and it'll all be good.
Yeah, it's you know, my favorite guy never did anything bad because he was killed by the other, you know, atheist before he got the chance to do anything bad.
Yeah,
so clearly he wouldn't have, for reason.
Yeah, exactly.
Your video was lagging a little bit there, Chris.
Yeah, I noticed that when it came up. I couldn't tell you what's going on with that.
Yeah, I actually find, ironically, and Max is going to hate me, as far as atheists go, it's actually the only the old school Marxists who seem to have any perspicacity in viewing the whole atheism phenomenon. You know, it's you know, is some members of the old left who are actually capable of viewing atheism as a historical phenomenon.
Yeah, well, and but there's the thing. Everybody who's been influenced by the new atheism, one of the things that's disturbing is you run into them, and they're not aware that they are themselves indoctrinated with this material. They just simply believe all the stuff, you know, religion freed itself from the oppressive shackles of superstitious, or science freed itself from all those shackles, and blah blah blah. They just believe it, and it's very Orwellian. Actually, it's like these young people believe this fake history.
Yeah,
and it's disturbing.
Well, you know, the thing is too, I think, by the way, for the whole Marxist, some of them can see it, is they're all in academia, right?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Really?
Well, it's like Terry Eagleton and Sam Criss, who's one of my favorite writers. He's an atheist. He's also a Marxist, but he's also written great things critiquing new atheism.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, well, what does he do as a
but they are better read. I mean, they do have a more well-rounded cultural education, certainly, than a person who knows everything they know about politics from anti-SJW videos, you know.
Although that's not the new atheists are interesting, you know, historically speaking. Actually, I have a video coming out soon.
Not interesting to talk to, but yes, as a phenomenon, yes.
Well, no, to talk to, they're pretty dreadful. Worse to read in general. But and I've got a video where I'm coming out soon. It's going to be about the history of the new atheists, because I mean, I think the new atheist movement is more or less officially dead at this point. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, looking at it and you know, some things about the Four Horsemen, but you know, the Four Horsemen were particularly I mean, I've seen a lot of memes about this, particularly intellectually deficient. They just they're best known for knowing nothing, I think, outside of their own little circle, and
narrow compass of expertise.
Yes, mostly being, what is their tiny little circle of expertise anyway? I mean, it's not like biology or physics or
well, Richard Dawkins was a research zoologist basically 40 years ago, so that's it.
But I mean, Max, do you want to take it away on Richard Dawkins' credentials as a biologist?
Richard Dawkins, well, you know, there's very few men who infuriate me more than Dawkins, just because I really do like science, and evolution has never bothered me, and so his creation of the whole atheist versus evolution thing really bothers me, because they don't really have to be in conflict. I mean, there's some who always think they are, but they're not. But I mean, if you look at the man's background, I'm sorry, he has done nothing meaningful in science since the 1970s. The selfish gene theory was provocative in the 70s. We now know that it's not science. It's not even wrong as scientists. It's not even wrong. It's just garbage. Selfish gene is garbage. He had been for years pushing something called mimetic theory, which is not the same as memetic, it's mimetic theory, and mimetic theory is based on the same idea as selfish gene, and it's garbage. It's the idea that the ideas can spread like a virus, and that religion is some sort of mind virus that infects you. And there were actually teams of sciences that they had a peer-reviewed journal of their own. They tried for years to show it, and they finally folded up more than 10 years ago because they had produced no results. I mean, zero. Nothing that could even start into a working definition of what a meme was. So the idea of the meme, you know, went down to, you know, the internet meme it's not what Dawkins meant, but it's actually the only use of the term that makes sense, because mimetic theory is pseudoscience. It's garbage. He's produced nothing in science in 30, 40 years. What he does teach about evolutionary theory is wrong. Why does anybody respect him even as a scientist? I mean, Cy Gart, who's a biochemist, said that some of his 70s work was very beautiful and well written and inspiring for certain aspects of evolution, but that's it. There's nothing else.
I mean, he has one natural virtue is that.
As far as rhetoric, he is a skilled rhetorician.
Yeah, well, and in particular, like when he tells a story, he's good at that. Like he's got a really good command of how to tell a story. Like the story of why a moth goes into a flame. Like he's really good at it. Whether or not, you know, anything he's telling you about it's true, he's really good at telling the story. But I will say, Richard Dawkins will always have a special place in my heart, because his Foundation for Reason and Science did put out the recruiting video, "If you are one of us, be one of us."
One of us. Oh, that was so good.
That video was just.
Oh, I noticed
it's like,
the Selfish Gene gave us Darwin. The Selfish Gene, the book, The Selfish Gene, gave us Darwin in that little ad that he put out. Did you notice that? With music and everything around the Selfish Gene. And Selfish Gene is junk. It's junk.
The whole thing. Did you ever see this video, Rob?
What? I don't know what you guys are talking about. No.
Oh, someday I did a video of my own about this. If you get a chance, look up the video. If you are one of us, be one of us. By the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science. I love the name of that foundation.
Yes.
It is so beautifully pretentious. But yes, no, it's things like it tells
the thing I love about them is that like around holiday time, they are more than happy to still propagate little Jesus mythicist pseudo scholarship. Science and Reason, yes.
Yeah, no, but their recruiting video is glorious. I mean, including as Max said, they're telling a brief history of Richard Dawkins, and what the part where they mention the Selfish Gene, literally like a choir of eight. They have a choir of, well, you know, they don't show them on screen. Angels go ah, and there's like a halo glow around the book as it's on screen. I mean, it is glorious. And their recruiting motto: if you are one of us, be one of us.
Yes.
And you have various levels and various circles you can join. At the top tier, at something like $10,000 a year, you get like an hour a month.
Yeah, you get to have a meal. You get to have a meal. Yeah, it's the magic. It's the magic of reality circle.
Yeah, and actually, you get to bring two friends to that meal because the one down, you get to be at the meal, and like at the highest level, you can bring two friends.
plus, you get a 15% discount on T-shirts. So that's what your $100,000 pay for.
Hey, Wayne joined us. Wayne, how you doing?
It's good. It's great to know that atheists have their own version of Amway.
That's exactly what it is.
And so do Satanists. I interviewed a Satanist on it. They got the same thing. Various levels you can join, and at the highest levels you get more perks. And oh my Lord.
Oh. This is my thing about Satan. I think it is an implicit acknowledgement of the fact that atheism isn't sexy. So they have to have all the rituals of religion. They make it a religion, even though they hate everything about religion, just because they understand that religious ceremonies, religious sacraments have this intrinsic draw to them. And if atheism is all just a bunch of self-satisfied, fedora wearers clucking about how rational and reasonable they are, that's gonna alienate some group of people. So they want to. I really see atheism just trying to putting out all these feelers, trying to catch people who would otherwise fall through their net. I think one time is like black consciousness. You see like people kind of trying to mine racial grievance to get people into atheism, and then you have the Satanists who maybe like. Things like flowy black robes and candles and are all into that shit. So that gets them into atheism. And so they're just, it's all for the same purpose, but kind of superficially different storefronts.
Are we talking about Satanists generally, or are we talking about like specifically the Church of Satan with Anton LaVey?
Yeah, Anton LaVey, and there's also the Satanic Temple, which is a more contemporary. Both are depending on who you ask. I mean, you can. I've talked to people say, yeah, well, that's what they say publicly. That's not what they believe privately, which honestly seems pretty reasonable to me. But yeah, the Satanic Temple also denies any sort of supernaturalism.
Yeah, because I actually got into an odd spat with them on Twitter with the Church of Satan Twitter feed, where the guy running it was telling me something about like, you idiot, look at our FAQ. I mentioned that they're basically just atheists who, want attention, and I do not
believe that you have marshaled unholy forces if you're asking people to look at your FAQ.
well, yeah, that's the thing. He told me this, and then I went and looked at the FAQ, and it's like we deny the supernatural. There's no such thing as God or Satan. It's a metaphor. I checked your FAQ. It said that I'm right. What the hell?
I'm sharing my screen again. I'm going to pimp this video that I did a couple of weeks ago, more than a month ago, late June.
I did not see that.
I do recommend it. It's not. We had some technical issues, but it's a very interesting stream. It's with Rick from Rome is Burning, a podcaster. He's an Eastern Orthodox Christian. used to be a hardcore atheist and then became a Satanist, and it's a whole discussion we have about how Satanism recruits heavily among atheists, and actually the history of the fedora started with the Satanists because Anton LaVey was a fedora wearer. And it became an atheist symbol for a while. Like the really hip atheists would be Satanists, was in the mid to late first decade of the century, right? Up till 2009, 2010, the really hard hip atheists would become Satanists. And it was, all Anton LaVey's Church of Satan, although they have some other groups too that are competing Satanist groups.
Yes.
And if you look into it, you'll find some Satanist groups are mad at all these Satanist groups because they worship the real Satan.
Yes. Yes.
Others will tell you that the atheist Satanists, the Church of Satan and Anton LaVey, if you get to the higher levels, tell you, no, there is a devil and you have to sell your soul to him and stuff.
Yes.
It's an interesting hangout. There is a heavy Satanist atheist connection. There really is.
I feel like this is an odd topic for us to join. Anton LaVey had a daughter. Her name was like Zinnia LaVey or something. Extremely attractive woman, which is kind of weird for me. But yeah, she's an extremely attractive woman. She was a staple on like Phil Donahue and all those shows in the 80s. But she admits like Anton LaVey denied this publicly, even though he had no idea that he was still marshaling supernatural forces. So she believes that, yes, he was engaging with the real Satan. He just didn't know what he was doing.
Yeah. By the way, have you ever read the 11 Satanic Rules of Earth that Anton LaVey came up with? It's from the Church of Satan.
No.
Oh, they're hilarious.
Isn't it just watered down objectivism?
No, it is glorious, and it sounds like it came from a D&D campaign to some degree. Okay, 1, do not give opinions or advice unless you are asked. I have no idea why. Do not tell your troubles to others unless you are sure they want to hear them. Now, number 3, when in another's lair, show him respect or else do not go there.
My lair. I'm gonna get my lighting fixed here, so it's not gonna be a lair anymore.
Rule number 4, if a guest in your lair annoys you, treat him cruelly and without mercy. 5, do not make sexual advances unless you are given the mating signal. 6, do not take that which does not belong to you unless it is a burden to the other person and he cries out to be relieved.
There's some more information that would have been helpful with that last item.
Well, I guess it's because atheists are so super smart. So none of them needs to be given additional information.
Okay.
7, acknowledge the power of magic if you have employed it successfully to obtain your desires. If you deny the power of magic after having called upon it with success, you will lose all that you have obtained.
Really? Yeah, see, okay.
This is MAGICK?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I think they believe magic is all psychological, or at least they'll tell you that. I don't know.
Do not complain about anything to which you need not subject yourself.
What's that?
Do not complain about anything to which you need not subject yourself. They don't want to end their sentence with a preposition.
Yeah, I know.
9, do not harm little children. 10, do not kill non-human animals unless you are attacked or for your food. And 11, when walking in open territory, bother no one. If someone bothers you, ask him to stop. If he does not stop, destroy him.
Employ lethal force.
This could also be like a certain sort of Romulan code from Star Trek Land. It's it's very nerdy. I like it. Lord.
Yeah, but do you see what I mean? It sounds like it might be in a D&D campaign.
Yes. Well, it's funny that Max said it sounds nerdy because like all the atheist tropes, even like the latter day atheist tropes like invisible skyfarers, and they just beat it into the ground, and it sounds like to my ears it sounds like a really bad Monty Python sketch where they just get this thing and they just hammer it into the ground. There's this kind of forced frivolity of just these little expressions or something. It's so wacky, and they just invisible skyfaring, and they just hammer it into the ground, and that's all. It just all seems cast of that sensibility.
Oh, hey, we got a commenter here calling out Wayne, and I got to ask Wayne a question about that too.
Wayne's not even here, so.
Does Wayne probably eventually leave?
I'm here, but I'm not here.
Oh, okay. Well, Antonio says, I have to give my apologies to Wayne. I thought he'd become an atheist hanging around with that trashy GDC by Steve McRae. Still disagree with him on evolution, but it appears he's a brother in the Lord. So you got an apology there. Steve McRae, have you been hanging with Steve McRae? Wow, that guy, I actually declined to talk to him. What was he like, man?
Really, I love Steve McRae. Steve McRae, he's a nice guy. He's my friend. We don't agree on theology, but as far as the science goes, we would agree on all of it. So that's pretty much it.
No, fair enough. I thought he was very slippery when he interviewed Christopher. I know Professor Kanine and I were both there, and he seemed like he was
got banned from the comments pretty early too, I believe.
Yeah, me and he both got banned from the comments. Well, I mean, he was, in my view, he was doing that. He was pulling that atheist burden of proof thing, and that's the first I'd heard that. Someone try to prove that. And I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah, Steve says he's not an atheist. He actually identifies as an agnostic apatheist. So
a patheist.
Yeah. That's just a nerdy aspy way of saying you're an atheist. I mean, apatheist means you think it doesn't matter.
Oh my God. They have this thing. I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but I was actually on one of their. I've fallen out with Steve. I think he's a slimy, lying POS. We'll get into that later. But I was actually on there, and he said he's like an apatheist. They actually have like a Russell, agnostic, whatever. All these convoluted identifications. It seriously reminds me of like the 53 different genders. It's like all the things that people use to try to make themselves sound more interesting. They're seriously, they made a little graph of all the different ways you could be an atheist or an agnostic and all the little intersecting identities. Seriously.
Have you ever had a conversation with Bionic Dance? Because if you like that, you'll love her.
Yes. No, I was going to say, she is the one. If you look at her like Twitter bio or something, she has this like 15-word description of what her philosophical stance about religion is. Like I said, it reminds me of the 53 different genders. It's like, no, it's not that complicated. You're trying to make yourself feel special, okay? But yes,
the first time I heard the phrase "igtheist" was in some science fiction literature. IG-theist, igtheist was in some science fiction fan literature back in the 80s and 90s. I think Spider Robinson identified himself as that. They are all just variations on the idea that there's either no God or it doesn't matter. Well, I think the igtheist says it's impossible for us to know anything about God. Therefore,
that would be an agnostic. That would just be an agnostic. That would be agnostic by the original dictionary definition.
Well, depending, because you can also get into the like Kabbalistic. You can't know anything about God.
Well, the Baha'i believe God is inherently unknowable. So they they claim they accept like the God of Abraham and stuff, except they insist God is completely unknowable and unreachable, which is like, okay, well, that's all I need to know. But you think there's a God, so.
Yeah, I mean, everyone agrees you can't comprehend God, obviously. God is beyond us. The problem is there are people who then say that, like, because like there's the debate, can you say anything, can you predicate anything of God univocally? That is to say, where the word means the exact same thing of us and of God. The answer is obviously not. Can you predicate anything of God analogically, however, by analogy? So can you say, for example, that God loves creation? And, Catholics and Christians in general say, yes, of course you can. You can say things like God loves creation. Yeah. However, you can find people who say, no, you can't. You can only predicate negative things of God. Like God doesn't hate creation. But you can't predicate anything positive of God. Yeah, even by analogy. And that's the thing. So what Max is talking about is the people who say you can't predicate anything of God, even analogically, that you can only predicate negative things of God, like God doesn't hate us and God isn't flawed. But at that point, if you can't actually say anything about God, it's really unclear in what sense you believe in God, since you can't actually say anything whatsoever about him or his relationship to creation.
Yeah, well, that's an extreme position, but
yeah, it's just you find them, and that's what Max was talking about. But
there's actually theology, but it's still kind of ontologically committed to God's existence.
Yeah, except it stops right there. Like God exists, and that's the end of the conversation. We'll have no other conversations whatsoever about God, because anything else you say is wrong.
What he isn't. Yes.
Yeah, it's hard to distinguish in practice from atheism, because the atheist also says nothing about God. Well, they complain about God a lot more. But anyway, just getting back to your point about the 15, the 15 modifiers to indicate who you are. You do occasionally find that in hobbies, though. Like, you will occasionally see hobbies where, because when people have to meet up with each other, they will, it becomes useful to have terms to indicate exactly, which things, so you can find somebody who's actually compatible with, whatever type of model railroad you want to run or something. And there was something
when you meet up at the cons, yeah,
well, exactly. I'm not a con attendee, but yes.
Neither am I. Yeah.
I just want to say, guys, I gotta run, but thanks for inviting me. And,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. I take care of somebody at my home. I take care of a family member.
Okay.
But
I hope we can invite you on some other time when you got more time, man.
Yeah, most definitely. I won't be free next week. Next week is my debate with King Crocodile, September 9th at 3:30. And we're actually going to be talking about what you guys were talking about 2 minutes ago. Has God revealed himself, or has God sufficiently revealed himself to mankind? So I think that'll be a really fun debate.
Where's this going to be? Where are we going to find this?
Steve McRae's channel.
Steve McRae. All right. We've been meeting Steve McRae here, but you're going to have a good conversation with him. I bet you will. I'm glad you did. Some people have less patience for that than others, and so God bless you for doing that. Maybe you got the right approach. You'll get through to the guy and his fans.
Who knows? Stay blessed.
God bless.
God bless you.
Have a good night, man.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nice guy. We'd had more of him in the conversation.
Yeah, we were talking with him at length, but I was certainly talking with him at length before the podcast started. But yes, I will say we're talking about Bionic Dance and Steve McRae, and again, I was kind of biting my tongue there because I do not hold the man in high esteem. But to his tremendous credit, he's willing to say that Bionic Dance is a moron. So.
So incidentally, as atheism is unstoppable.
Oh my goodness, yes, and they're just so nasty too. That's the thing. Them and their fans are so nasty, and that's something that once you notice it, you can't unnotice it. They really are bitter and angry at the world, and I have sympathy for somebody. I've seen some people who've become atheists because they had very negative religious experiences.
Yes.
I had very negative religious experiences. That's something I think a lot of Christians don't like talking about, and I think they should. Because I know that a lot of atheists get scooped. Somebody comes out of an extreme religion, probably a Christian fringe group, like some extremist Mormons, or gets into Jehovah's Witness or something like that. And then they come out of it and they figure out, they were in a really rigidly controlling, stereotypical, controlling religious environment, and they feel liberated. They get scooped up by these atheists, but they're just getting scooped up by another fringe cult.
Exactly. Out of the frying pan into the fire, yeah.
In fact, aren't they? I know relatively little, but it seems to stand to reason that somebody in that position would be especially vulnerable to being preyed upon by another cult, simply because it gives them a framework that they are used to, and consequently, it'll seem familiar and more normal than actual normalcy.
Yeah. Well, Max and I know someone in particular we could talk about. Yes.
Oh, really? Who are you thinking of?
Nothing. I'm not going to mention it, but yes.
Oh, okay. Well, that's.
Oh, well, but let me. By the way, I know exceedingly little about Devin Tracy, also known as Atheism is Unstoppable. But I will say he had two videos because Bionic Dance had some sort of fight with him, left a long comment where she was accusing him of being a racist or something. I forget exactly, and so he made some videos about how stupid she is. And the second one was flagged for
I'm sure he made a few pot shots about her appearance while he was at it, yeah.
Not in the first video. I've got a friend whose theory is that's why the second video was taken down for community violations, because the first one was largely just a response to her points. Now, he does have something of a curious habit of putting very unrelated images or slow motion video in his. So if you listen to it with just flip to a different tab while listening to it. It's kind of interesting, and I especially liked his point, and credit to him for this, where she was bringing up something or other about the Westboro Baptists, and his response was, "Are you kidding me? This is like 35 people, most of whom are in the same family, and all they do is say mean words to people."
Yes, he always does. Again, Atheism is Unstoppable is the only atheist YouTube channel I actually watch, quite honestly, nowadays. I'm actually kind of envious of him a little because he's so good at what he does. But yeah, it's like if you talk about like the Young Turks or something, the Young Turks reflexively, whenever there's a Muslim terrorism, now I feel like my YouTube is going to take down my own channel now, just even for mentioning the topic. But whenever there's a Muslim terrorism, the Young Turks always do the false equivalence. Well, there's Westboro Baptist Church, and he always calls them out on their crap. So props to him for that,
I've got a rant about Westboro Baptist. I'm convinced that, just as I'm thoroughly convinced, and I think it can be shown that the New Atheist Explosion was a social justice project. It runs on the whole thing. The whole thing was commie propaganda. It really was, and you can show how it was. Even going in before that, shoot, now I just lost my point.
You're going to say the Westboro Baptists are a commie plant.
Oh, yes. All the way through the 90s, it was normal to see regular clergy, Catholic bishops, their various kinds of ministers having columns in newspapers and people you would bring in to be religious experts in the news. You notice that completely disappeared by the mid to late 2000s, and the only Christians you typically saw on the news were people like Fred Phelps, who never deserved the attention he got in the first place.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure at the height he may have had as many as 100 followers.
Yeah.
His popularity, and they're gone now. And actually, yeah, I mean, if you're gonna even hold them up as the worst of Christianity, they were strictly nonviolent.
Yes.
Very strictly nonviolent. And actually, if you look into it, even though he's crazy as a bug, he had a actually pretty good record as a civil rights lawyer.
Yeah, that's the thing. He was exactly. He had a sterling record. He was a pioneer in civil rights.
And he went crazy at some point. Okay, I mean, even serious Baptists who don't like the gays still couldn't stand, Fred Phelps. You know, it was ludicrous the amount of attention he got. And it's like, I do see this as a whole campaign to like push the sane religious people off the front page and show religious people as crazy. It's been a very ongoing thing in the press for a long time.
Well, I also think if you want to be less conspiratorial, you could also say that there are things that kind of lodge themselves in the atheist imagination that the rest of the culture is just kind of glossed over. Like I regularly hear atheists make reference to the guy who thought that his toaster burned an image of Jesus onto his toast. Now, no one else remembers that, but atheists continually make reference to that.
Yeah, and I remember some years ago, it was making front page news that some crazy Christians had seen the Virgin Mary in a grilled cheese sandwich.
Yeah. And
I'm like, why is that front page news? Because anybody, talk to a sane Catholic, they're going to roll their eyes.
Yes.
Right? They don't do that. They just want to make people look dumb. And it gets old after a while. An alligator in the clouds? Yeah. Well, I mean, sure.
I mean, isn't that basically what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that if I made enough grilled cheese sandwiches, I'll get something that looks sort of like the Blessed Mother sooner or later. I mean,
look at the Lansdown. That is hyperactive agent detection. Therefore, atheism. That's actually an atheist argument. It just therefore no God. Yes.
Yes. Although, by the way, just let me give a plug out for if you want to laugh at the stupidest thing that anyone's ever come up with. I believe it is. I think this really does qualify. It's called the bicameral mind theory. If you look it up on Wikipedia, it's bicameralism. But yeah, the idea that up to about 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, rather, the two lobes of the brain didn't communicate properly, and so our internal monologue was heard as an exterior voice.
Yes.
And from which we concluded that there was a God.
Yes.
And It's glorious because the guy believes, the theory holds that the changeover from the bicameral mind to the unicameral mind happened in between the writing of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Because you can see the bicameral mind in the Iliad, but not in the Odyssey.
Yes.
And so he believes that, like, for example, the people who made the pyramids were all these raving schizophrenics who were all hearing the voice, tie your shoes, and going like, yes, Lord, I'll tie my shoes, except they didn't, because, they'd have had to say that out loud for it not to be their interior monologue unless they think it God. And so, they actually, this theory actually holds this. But what really makes it dumb is that it brings in so many different disciplines. Because not only do you have to know nothing about human beings whatsoever, and really nothing about history whatsoever, you also have to know nothing about literature. And this is a rare accomplishment, to be this stupid in this many fields simultaneously. Usually someone can get something right.
The thing is Richard Dawkins at one point actually made a kind of an approving reference to breakdown of the bicameral mind, acknowledging its speculation. Well, it's interesting to toss these kind of ideas. I think anything that kind of marginalizes Christianity has some degree of assent from him. It's like, yeah, it's engage these ideas. If anyone said God might exist, he would have no tolerance for that view.
The whole idea that we would basically believe that ideas came to us from God when they were really just another part of our brain. It's like, you should be able to find an example of this happening in the real world. There's enough people who are still not civilized. You should be what we call civilized. You ought to be able to find it, and you can't. You can find other interesting things about pre-civilizational peoples, including some don't have a really good sense of time. No. But this is any theory that makes religion look bad is like treated like it's some sort of scientific theory when it's just some crap he pulled out of his butt. What were we going to say? Sorry.
Oh, but this isn't pre-civilizational. This is long after the advent of writing and so on. This is in between the Iliad and the Odyssey.
That's a good point. Yeah. So I mean,
this is on the level of those freaks who talk about the on the History Channel about how there were the interstellar runways in different places up until like the 1200s or something.
Right. So you should be find people that are talking like that now, that are behaving that way now. Can we study them and talk to them? Because I want to talk to them.
This is my question. Well, when that transition happened, did it happen everywhere at the same time? Did it just happen in ancient Greece between the Iliad and the Odyssey, or did it happen everywhere at the same time?
It's a good question, because my recollection of the article, and I haven't read it in a few years, was that it was a series of earthquakes that triggered this because people needed to adapt, and the old, effectively hyper-schizophrenic model didn't work anymore, and so they needed, their brains to work differently, so they did. And that was relatively a local phenomenon, so I don't know. It's possible that they hold that this works so well that anytime you talk to anybody, like it just, mind infects them. It wasn't spelled out exactly how everybody shifted over in between the Iliad and Odyssey to this utterly radically different way of thinking from people who actually thought their internal monologue was like a god outside of them.
They thought their internal monologue was God, and they never...
A god.
And there was a switch somewhere that went off in our brains that made us not see that anymore.
Yes. Oh, speaking of dumb things, too, by atheists, if you also want truly insane theorizing, The Goddess versus the Alphabet is another really excellent video for laughs. This one's told by a surgeon come religion, philosopher of religion, who believes that it was the... It's relevant here, not just because it's hilarious and, why not have fun, but because the guy's theory had to do with alphabetic writing actually, makes us use one side of our brain instead of the other, and uses the side of our brain, I think it's the left side, because you use your right hand for writing, and your right hand for like stabbing and so on. So that's the masculine side, and your left hand for holding a baby and like defending yourself, and that's the feminine side. And so, writing and alphabetic writing in particular activated the male side of our brain, making us hate women, and therefore rejecting the great goddess in switching over to male gods. This is a video I watched for Max years ago because somebody told him about it, and he didn't have the time, and I actually slogged through the entire darn thing.
That almost sounds like gender studies lit crit is creeping into that.
No, it's science. It's science. It's pure science. Don't you see, you primitive-minded religious freak, you?
Yes.
Good Lord. It's like
science.
Don't believe anything. Just like, and you know what? One of the things that bothers me though is when I was a kid growing up in the 80s and 90s, like nerd culture, and even the 70s, nerd culture was a lot more cool because all the weird stuff was always there in nerd culture. I mean, the UFO people were there, and the reincarnation people were there, and the astrology people were there, and the Christians were there, and like people would argue about stuff like this and talk about stuff like this. And what I've noticed is in nerd culture today, or what they call it, it's like, no, you're not supposed to talk about that. You're just not. Everybody's been indoctrinated in philosophical materialism and scientific naturalism, and it's weird to watch what it's done to their brains. I really think you can inflict atheism on young people by just drilling scientific naturalism into them from birth.
Yeah, well, there was something, culturally speaking, at least I remember somewhat, because I'm about 10 years younger than you are, and I do remember though, around when like the ability to dismiss, whether it be conspiracy theories or UFOs or what have you, like the ability to be aggressively closed-minded about them was, like a mark of, a mark of being in group, a mark of being intelligent. Because I mean, like UFO stuff was not all that long-lived as a phenomenon. People being interested in UFOs and so on. And I mean, every once in a while, hear somebody say something about like, hey, isn't it, amazing that now that everyone has a camera, no one talks about UFOs anymore. But it's not a long-lived phenomenon that people are that interested in it.
It goes back and forth because it was all the rage in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and it did come back, but only in like X-Files fashion. One of the things and see, I'm not necessarily taking a position on the UFO thing. I guess I'm making the broader that nerds and nerd culture were willing to explore all these ideas, right? And now you see them. Now you see them. I mean, like from a traditional Christian worldview, there's some who say no, but they're just wrong. From a traditional Christian worldview, the existence of intelligence aliens visiting us is not impossible and is not theologically challenging, not particularly anyway.
I've got the book on my shelf. Would you baptize an extraterrestrial? The priest's answer is, if he asked me to.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. But now it's all like, I mean, I even saw one recently, like the UFO people are saying the existence of aliens would disprove religion. I'm like, how? How?
Yes.
Lewis answers that.
In fact, that's what fairies are. If fairies ever existed, it could be aliens. Why not? How does that challenge anything? All right, I'll shut up now.
Exactly. I mean, I see that like on Facebook when someone will post an article about like aliens. It's like the first comment is like, boy, if aliens are discovered, the first thing that will happen is all religions will be invalidated. It's like, that's all you care about, isn't it? You don't even care about aliens. You don't care about aliens insofar as they can be instrumental in eradicating the world of religion in your mind, and you can't even explain the mechanism by which this happens. Now, there's something I've noticed a lot about atheists. There are these arguments. It's kind of like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So supposedly in the minds of atheists, if we discover alien life, that will invalidate God, that will invalidate religion somehow. But at the same time, if there is no alien life, if there is no light, that just shows that the universe isn't fine-tuned for life, so that disproves the teleological principle. It's like we can't win either way. If aliens do exist or they don't exist, somehow that disproves religion or God or whatever.
Yeah, actually, a story I'm going to write someday. I'm partway through. Is one in which space exploration happened. We actually met a race of intelligent mantoid-like creatures, where the very first thing that they said was, finally the people of the Savior have that we were promised have arrived, and that the basic thing being, I forget the exact thing, but roughly speaking, essentially, once enough translation happens, they're able to communicate that they were promised that there would be a savior born on another planet who would be crucified and so on, and that finally they would come and bring to them the sacrament. So the first thing they demand is priests to come over.
That's a good idea for a story. And speaking of which, in case anybody doesn't know, Christopher Lansdown is the author, the science fiction author of A Stitch in Space, and he has other books too. So y'all might want to go check that out. It appears to be available in Amazon in both Kindle and paperback versions. And there's actually a lot of room for Christians to explore science fiction. There's lots of neat ideas.
That one doesn't have aliens. That's pure human exploration, not for any theological reason, just because that was the story I was telling. But
yes, it has a 4.5-star rating, so atheists going dog. I'm sorry.
You guys can get that down to 1 star tonight. Go.
I'm sorry.
Oh, God, they might do it. Sorry. Because they do.
Well, on the other hand, that would give me more reviews, and the larger the number of reviews is actually very helpful.
Fair enough. But listen, guys, I got to get going pretty soon. I don't know if you're going to keep going, but I got to get going pretty soon.
Sure thing.
I got about 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, you have it. What do you want to talk about?
Oh, gee whiz. I don't know. Just stuff. Well, I will notice in terms of atheist follies, why don't I make a note of this one last article then? Zoom in. Stephanie Thomason, Professor Stephanie Thomason, she's fun to watch on Twitter, although she's finally given up interacting with atheists. She had given up religion, and now she's a professor down in Florida. They've tried to get her fired a few times, but she's got tenure, so she's all right. She really upset some people this last week when she wrote this article right here called "Health Correlates of Religiosity and Atheism, and the Truth Will Set You Free." And she puts together a whole number. It's a long article. I'm scrolling through it now, that's showing the positive physiological effects basically of going to religious services every week. It doesn't even matter what the religious services are for the most part. People who go to religious services regularly live longer, are healthier, have less depression, less likely to suicide, more stable marriages, more stable careers, more overall life satisfaction, and less drug use, and less likely to go to jail. And boy, did they get mad at her.
Yeah.
Oh my God, they got so mad at her. It's so funny when they've got data that supposedly makes atheists look smart and good and noble and everything. They're all about that science. But give them some science suggesting there's problems with ideological atheism, and they lose their minds.
Yeah. Like I said, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's one of their dogmas is that atheists, commit no crime or virtually no crimes and have virtually no problems.
Yes. That was going to be my point. Is that with atheists, it's always what's good for the goose isn't necessarily good for the gander. So yeah, they'll use statistics like that. Well, like 97% of people in jail are religious. But when you try to put, religion makes you healthier or happier and stuff. Oh, well, that doesn't prove God exists. You're using a fallacious argument. So I mean, we've used this. They'll point to some the informal survey of the National Academy of Sciences members in like 1996 or something that showed 93% were atheists. And when you try to mention scientists who are Christians, you're using an argument from authority fallacy.
Oh yeah, and that survey in the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences can't be replicated and was never scientific in the first place.
Yes.
Listen, okay, I'm going to close with this. Antonio left a comment, and you'll like hearing this, Mr. Deflating Atheism. This is a good one for your 1K subs. Antonio Fletcher says, "I've learned so much from Deflating and Max Kolbe's channel. I knew there was significant evidence theism is true, but I didn't really know how deep the science indicate that reality." It is. There's all kinds of stuff in science that points to God. You're never going to get your 100% proof. Nobody's going to invent the God swab that's with the God scores that are going to. But there's evidence all over science. The interesting thing is there's evidence all over contemporary science. And while it seems exciting because we're all, trained to think the science is always the hot thing, like I really don't see how you get out of the digital physics theory of the universe if it's true that there has to be a God. There just does, right? Yeah. But oddly enough, I really do think the classical evidence is stronger because it's not subject to being overturned. The classical evidence, like the argument from intelligibility, the argument from desire, the argument from motion, that's all actually stronger because any of the science, like I always talk up the near-death experience research too, and I don't do it because I think the near-death experience research can never be debunked, but just because
it is falsifiable in principle, at least.
It's what they say is, you know, they want scientific evidence. Well, it's really strong evidence. I mean, it may be wrong. There may be something wrong with it. It may eventually be overturned because that's the nature of science. It can be overturned. But somebody tries to say it's not evidence. They're lying.
Yeah.
It's like saying, you know, the Big Bang Theory is not evidence of God. Yes, it is. So is the digital universe theory. So is the cosmological constants. It's all evidence. It's how you interpret it.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, hey, God bless. Congrats on hitting 1,000. We're hoping to hit 2,000 pretty soon ourselves.
You just had to one-up me.
I'm sorry. That's true. I didn't mean that. You're still my favorite channel of all time. So there you go. All right. God bless, guys. See you, Chris.
Have a good night. God bless.
God bless you, Max.
Yeah. I don't know if you ever saw. Some people have a different opinion. Some even Christians have a different opinion of the debate between William Lane Craig and Sean Carroll. I thought Sean Carroll's performance was just so cringy. I was literally like this in my seat until he got to a point where he says, "Oh well, you know." William Lane Craig said, "Oh, well, God can make the universe gigantic just because he's an artist. That's the way he wants to make it." He says, "Oh, well," Sean Carroll says, "Oh, so you're admitting that God is flaky like an artist?" At that point, I had to click it off at that point. I was in physical discomfort through the whole thing. But that was the thing. It's like William Lane Craig, I'm not like a cosmologist expert, but just take even what they say at face value. He says, well, the prevailing model is that the universe is past finite. And Sean Carroll is like, well, yeah, well, there's this model that we have that no one has believed since 1982 that holds that the universe is past infinite. So yeah, you can propose models that are past infinite. It's like, well, you have a model that describes a universe. It just doesn't describe our universe. So how does that somehow undermine the Kalam cosmological argument? Yes, these are models that can theoretically describe a universe. I guess they're all self-sufficient in that regard. They're just not ours.
Has that may be going a little far even there. Has anybody actually evaluated these models? Because I mean, Aquinas very famously doesn't bother, you know, like the argument for motion, for example, is an instantaneous thing. The argument for motion is in the moment, you know, it's in a sense between one moment and the next. Like, how does one moment turn into the next moment? And that requires a prime mover, you know, going back to Aristotle. So, you know, famously, Aquinas' arguments do not depend on whether or not the universe was finite or infinite. But my thing is, if the universe had an infinite past, this literally doesn't mean anything, in fact, because, and besides which, and you can see this simply from mathematics, this would be equivalent to being able to traverse the negative integers in order, which is not doable. Yeah. Because you can establish you could easily establish a correspondence between the negative integers and the past moments of time. But the thing is, like, that doesn't mean anything. This is looking backwards and saying, like, well, maybe that could keep happening forever. I could keep walking in that direction. But no, that's not what the past means. The past means you walked this way. Yes. Not that you could walk that way. And it's, I mean, nobody can actually say what they mean by the universe having an infinite past. It doesn't, you know, the thing that already happened could keep going on forever?
Yeah.
No, it's done. That's what past means. Past means it's finished.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's neither here nor there. That just annoys me because it's one of those things where that is basically the same, you know, that is pretty much literally waving your hands and saying, pay attention to the hands, don't pay attention to what I'm saying, and then you won't notice how this magic trick just happened. That's what they're doing.
There are models of the universe where the universe has been in continual expansion and is still at a finite size. Just like we can look at a mathematical function, we can have it at the 0 point and it has a finite value, and you could extend it infinitely, and you could extend it infinitely in the past. But that assumes that the universe is just like a mathematical function, and the present is the 0 point. You know, the past is real. So I mean, you're gonna have to grapple with that. It's not a potential negative infinity. It has to be actual if that's the argument you're going to make.
Yeah. Well, and the one thing we know the universe is not is a mathematical function.
Yeah.
It's a universe, not a mathematical function. It's relatively easy to tell the difference between these two things.
Well, Bertrand Russell knew that. I mean, Bertrand Russell understood that if you have a set of equations, that's not going to make anything real. I could make up a set of equations. I can create a model of the universe. That doesn't mean the universe is created.
Yeah. It's funny too because I've seen.
By the way, there's a lot of noise there. What is that?
Oh, I believe my children are throwing things on the floor upstairs because their room is above my office. So here, let me.
You don't have to do anything.
Here, if I turn that down and speak up, this may help. Is that better by any chance?
It's fine.
Okay, I apologize. Yeah, they're not asleep yet. My wife's watching them, so do what I can. Anyway, the thing I've seen physicists who will say that like physics literally doesn't mean anything past the equations.
You can turn yourself up a little more, yeah, I think.
Okay. Better?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry for the technical stuff. Anyway, yeah, I've run into them where physicists say that the physics literally means nothing past the equations. And, where they disclaim literally all interpretations of the equations, that all interpretations of equations are simply invalid because they're not the equations. Now, it's kind of interesting where that goes, and I don't want to go into the boring technical side of it, but the flip side of it is you will occasionally see people who will say things like, well, the equation doesn't require time to move forward, so why does time move forwards and not backwards?
Yes.
Maybe if you tried being a human being for a little while. Just for a little while.
I mean, look, I'm coming at this obviously as a layman. But yes, I read how entropy causes the arrow of time and how entropy causes time itself. It's like, well, if we just take the most, people are like, yes, clearly this invalidates all theistic conceptions of time and invalidates the Quran. But if particles are moving, wouldn't they be moving in time? I mean, that's my layman's understanding, but I think because a physicist says it, and it seems to support an atheistic worldview, or seems not even support an atheistic world, but seems to hobble a certain theistic argument, they will lend their uncritical support to it.
Oh, yeah. But by the way, the kind of layman explanation of what's going on when physicists talk about this is that, like, say you were to observe, two particles hitting each other and bouncing off.
Yeah.
Now, you can't, without knowing what direction they were moving ahead of time, by just looking at the initial position and the final positions, like if you see a recording of positions, you can't tell the difference inherently between playing that forward and playing it backwards and know, oh, that's the one that was backwards. No, that was the one that was forwards.
Yes.
That's what they mean by the equations are
reversible. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's sort of what's being talked about, that like, that could have been this.
Yeah.
In terms of like the equation, since all the relevant things are conserved in this interaction, like you can't tell the difference between playing it forward and playing it backwards is what's sort of meant by that. And I don't think it's a good topic to delve
What I heard, again, this is my layman's understanding, is that somehow particles achieve some sort of anti-entropic superstate just as the course of their motion, and that's what caused the arrow of time. And that seems contradictory.
Well, in any event, the relevant thing here, because I think your basic point stands, that the only degree to which you typically see people caring about this who are not professional physicists is, does this seem like a stick with which I can beat Christianity?
Just like the aliens thing, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Because like if you look at what the physicists actually mean, it doesn't have the implications that they think it does.
Yes.
And so it just becomes one more of those how to beat things. By the way, speaking of beating things, metaphorically with a stick, I really liked your hacking atheism video.
Thank you. That has been done over so many times by atheists. Sometimes atheists should just swarm like flies onto a video. And it's not my favorite. There was another video that was like that they all just like out of a hive mind just all responded to. Yes, a godless engineer actually talked about his response to me when he actually instructed his followers to log into all 10 of their accounts and download my video. Yes. So godless engineer has been a thorn in my side.
Yeah, no, I really liked it because I just to call it to mind for those who may not have seen it recently. I still remember the there's no evidence for God's in
which God, yes.
Yes, which God is there no evidence for? Now, of course, in my experience, they'll all just say all of them. There's no evidence for any God. And just to sort of add into this, I actually had Eve Canine make a meme for me, which has a picture of the sun and a picture of the moon. And it says, I'm sorry, picture of the earth and a picture of the sun, saying two gods that, theoretically speaking, atheists don't believe in, the god Helios and the goddess Gaia.
Yes.
Maybe you should have thought that slogan through.
Yes.
Because I think there's some evidence for the sun and the moon. And I'm sorry, well, the moon is a god too, but and the earth, I kind of think there is some evidence for those gods. Now, and which gets to the point again of hacking this, that they will then start to say like, well, no, not, obviously I believe in the sun and the earth, just not that they're supernatural, at which point you then can press them for what the heck they actually mean.
Yes, because you implicitly understand the difference between a God, uppercase G, God, and a God.
Yeah, well, what's great too is, what's actually kind of funny is if you push them on this, the supernatural thing, they then don't have really an understanding of what they mean by supernatural. So it's kind of fun just to push them on this because it becomes, at least if you're doing this for onlookers' sake, if it's just you and somebody else on the street, whatever, but like if it's you and somebody else and a third person on the street,
yes,
pushing them a little bit to the point where they obviously have no idea what they mean by supernatural can be kind of useful because they really clearly don't. Like, well, what does the supernatural mean? Like, action at a distance? Well, magnetism acts at a distance and so does gravity actually. Two things interact without touching each other. So what's the supernatural that you're talking about? Not natural. That's helpful. So yeah, I really, really liked though, because you took a different route there, because you did, was it Stalin, right? And Jusha.
Yeah, I mispronounced it, yeah.
But yeah, I really like that one about like, okay, so there seems to be evidence for Kim Jong-il existing.
Yeah,
I guess no Kim
pretty
Jong-un.
solid evidence. If North Koreans are not atheists because they believe Kim Jong-il is a god, then I think there's pretty solid evidence Kim Jong-il exists. They think he's a god. He's not really. Well, okay. Well, you're talking. If anything that can be worshipped as a god is a god, that's how you get Zeus and the invisible sky fairy and stuff. But the thing is, you can never make it. They will always find that stupider level. They will always find the stupider level. And so if did you see the thing with a science enthusiast where he actually discussed? Again, the thing got responded to like 4 or 5 times, and it was far from my favorite video. It was honestly just something I just kind of hacked off. But he responded to it, yeah, the stupid Christian says that God exists because North Koreans believe Kim Jong-il is God. Completely missed the point.
Oh, yes. There's so many of them who cannot, who are, I don't know, constitutionally incapable of believing that a Christian is making any point other than God exists.
Yes. Oh, that's the whole thing. It's like when I press them on the whole, can you prove that there is no evidence for God? And he says, well, I'm not going to prove God doesn't exist. Well, that's not the claim I'm asking you to prove. I'm asking you to prove the claim you made. That, in their mind, that is the only issue there could possibly be. And the only as Christians, we are not allowed to talk about anything. What you and I have been talking about this whole discussion, and atheists will reply, that whole discussion, none of you gave any evidence for God. We're just indebted to spend every waking second trying to play the game of convince the atheist.
Yes.
There's nothing there's nothing worth talking about unless we're trying to play the game of here's evidence for God, and they swat it away and say that's not evidence.
Yes, I actually made a video specifically about how I'm not trying to prove to them that God exists.
Yes.
Is the one I titled, Dear Lack of Belief Atheists, I'm Not Your Father. And it's because the lack of belief atheists annoy the heck out of me when they're talking.
Yeah.
To me. Like they want to go off and not believe in God someplace, that isn't talking to me about this. Fine. But I'm not their dad. They don't need to give me some dumb excuse about, like, I didn't actually do anything. I just lack a belief. I'm not going to punish you. I'm not going to
Yeah.
take away your phone. Stop trying to pretend you didn't do anything.
Yeah.
You live your life as if God doesn't exist. I know this. You know this. Everyone knows this. Everyone everywhere knows that you live your life as if God doesn't exist. Stop trying to tell me that you don't actually believe that to be the case. I don't understand why this is so important.
It goes back to the whole notion that the burden of proof is for beliefs. Like, no, you have a burden of proof if you claim something to be true. And that's the whole thing when they say, oh, well, if I can't prove it, then I have to believe. No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying you have to believe anything. All I'm saying is if you make a claim, give me some reason to believe why what you're saying is true.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you're going to say.
Oh, it's the burden of proof is there are two ways of making somebody do something. Force them to do it at gunpoint or something equivalent. Convince them to do it.
Yes.
That's the burden of proof right there. If you can't force somebody to do something and you want them to do it, you have to convince them of it. There's the burden of proof.
That is the pragmatic reality, and not to plug my own video, but I have a video called "There Is No Evidence for God." But yeah, I basically make the issue as pragmatic as possible. I believe in God. I believe there is good evidence for God. Now, if you can give me a reason to believe this belief is wrong, fine, give it to me. Otherwise, I will go on. I'm not even using any philosophical concepts there. I'm stating, as a matter of fact, I will continue to believe that there is evidence for God unless I am given a reason to believe otherwise.
It's a very, very hard claim to prove, incidentally, that there is no evidence for God.
I don't think it's provable even in principle. I can't demonstrate that to be the case. But the thing is that the claim there is no God is at least in principle demonstrable. You could try to use something like the omnipotence paradox, or God can't be all just and all merciful. I'm not saying these are successful arguments, but in principle they could be used to support the position that there is no God. When you pretend intellectual humility and say, oh, well, I would never make a claim that there is no God. I'm just saying that there is no evidence for God. You're still making a claim. What's worse, you're making a claim that seems to be unprovable even in principle. You've jumped out of the furnace, out of the frying pan into the fire. So yes.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. Well, and of course, it always turns, if you ever push any of them, it always turns on trying to creatively redefine evidence such that there is none of it.
Yes.
Because it becomes something like, ironically too, just as a small side note, they tend to try to retreat into like there is no empirical evidence for God, as if like you could poke God or something. But that said, again, and this is the strange thing with the argument from contingency, the things that you actually experience are contingent.
Yes.
They are therefore evidence for God.
Yes.
So the funny thing is, even though they try to retreat to this like empirical evidence as if like that's their trump card, in fact, there's a ton of empirical evidence for God. In fact, all the empirical evidence that you have is also, whatever else it may be, evidence for God.
Yes, exactly. It's like when somebody said that to me, it's like, well, look at anything that's around you. Look at this little notebook. I mean, the fact that anything exists at all is evidence for God. This gets back to my problem with what you said earlier, is that you said that you agree that arguments by themselves are not atheists. No, I would say that all evidence is an argument.
Well, okay, I was using argument in the sense of a discursive argument. That is like something, something in words with several steps and a therefore conclusion at the end of it.
I think even inductive scientific evidence, it does have that discursive element, because it is part of it is an implicit deductive argument that what has already happened. It is the first premise is this is the case. This is what has happened heretofore. The second unstated premise is what has happened heretofore is a reliable guide for what will happen in the future. And so scientific induction, to my mind, is a deductive argument with an unspoken premise.
Well, it is, yes. Yeah, what's called induction is just a deductive argument where you leave some of the argument out. That is certainly true. I'm just making sort of a technical distinction between, like the knife with the guy's fingerprint on it is evidence, and then most of the time nobody even bothers with the argument, but the argument is how you know what it actually proves.
Yeah.
Like
that's
this.
And I'm sorry, that sounds very much like something Max says, where they will take something like that, and maybe it was you. They will atomize all evidence so you can't connect one thing to another anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's always. I mean, if you really, really push atheists, they always become hyper reductionists.
Yes,
and to the point where people don't really exist, and there's no such thing as thinking, and nothing really exists. Like nothing, the only thing that actually exists is subatomic particles. At which point you literally can't do anything, because But it's funny, they never noticed that, like, at that point you can't define what a human being is.
Yeah,
define a human being in terms of quarks. How can I tell quarks only, nothing but quarks? How can I tell what a human being is?
Yeah.
If you use any words other than top, was it top, bottom, strange, charmed?
Charm, yeah.
Oh, they're one I forget off the top of my head. Anyway, but yeah, that's the. I mean, I don't think we're fundamentally disagreeing. Just as a matter of terminology, I'm separating evidence into essentially the premises of an argument, and then the argument is the part that connects the premises to the conclusion. So I'm just, that's sort of the distinction that I'm trying to get at, that evidence is the premises in an argument. And so the thing that connects the premises to the conclusion is not the premises, it's the body.
The evidence is a premise, not all the premises, but it's
right, yes.
Premise, yes.
Yeah, and again, like, it's one of those things too, like, no one ever spells out their arguments in total because they trust the person they're talking to as a human being.
Well, that's the thing, is that with atheists is that they constantly misapprehend. They think that there is this thing called evidence that speaks for itself without any sort of human mediation.
Yes. Yeah. Evidence just interprets itself in a vacuum with no rational minds around. Then you just receive this, in emanating waves off the evidence.
Yeah.
Evitons. It's evitons. There we go.
I don't know how that would work, but then they just seem to subtract all sort of intelligence and rationality from any process that would involve interpreting these. So they just, not only is their worldview one of just dumb brute matter, their whole concept of evidence is just this kind of dumb, self-apparent just facticity.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
their entire project, either whether it's subtracting an intelligent designer from the universe or from an eliminativist materialism conception of consciousness, is subtracting intelligence from the universe, and they claim that theirs is the intelligent, rational position. That always just gets me.
Yeah, no, it really, really is weird, the degree to which they will retreat to there is no such thing as intelligence. I mean, I remember I've made challenges like this. Like, I've never met an atheist who believes that reason works. And then I point out, like, I mean, literally, that reason can be used to know truth.
Yes.
Not like we can make models that we can guess at and maybe test, and then we'll never know whether they're right or wrong, but, hey, we made this mental model. But no, reason can be used to know truth. I've never met an atheist who believes that once. They all deny reason.
And reason is itself based in an investment of faith. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's as Eve likes to put it, it's predicated on noetic knowledge. That's to say direct knowledge. Like, there are things and then you can use that to know other things from it. They eliminate the beginning part, so you start off with not knowing anything. And of course, I just for fun, I illustrated this in formal logic with a blank screen, a line, and then the therefore, and that's all you get. If you have no premises, you have no conclusion. So if you eliminate all premises, you're done.
Yes,
you're exactly done. It's funny too that in my experience, most atheists know so very little about science, and this is the thing. Like, whenever I push them on entirely secular subjects, they never know anything.
Yeah,
things that should not be in any way controversial. Like people trying to give me empirical evidence for mathematics. I've got a math degree, so that one particularly pisses me off. But like, even just things like, I remember pointing out to someone that, like, gravity is not in fact, empirically, gravity is not empirically verifiable, like in the direct sense of look and you see gravity. Like, you need an argument.
Yes. From
various things you can observe to infer the existence of gravity.
Yes.
And then
hypostatized, I think, is the word.
Sorry, what?
Hypostatized is, I think, what we use to infer kind of the existence of something real. Never.
Well, anyway, yeah. the point being here, like, I was just pointing that, and it's really clear, like, you can't taste gravity, you can't see gravity, you can't hear gravity, you can't smell gravity, you can't feel gravity. You can't do any of these things with gravity. Therefore, you can use things from which you can do these things to infer the existence of gravity. And, oh man, did this set the guy off. I got called an idiot many times for this one. It set him off. And what's really great was he's like, okay, fine, if you don't believe in gravity, then drop something and, you know, see if it doesn't fall. Okay, so let me get this straight. You believe that the existence of a helium balloon disproves gravity? I mean, it was, first off, and this is just leaving it aside from the fact that, like, they don't understand things like, you know, you have to be able to exclude competing hypotheses.
Yeah.
You know, so for example, just dropping something and it falls does not exclude, for example, things like being near the ground. So they go there if you're not holding them away from it. That would explain things drop just as well as, you know, this mystical force of gravity does. They don't get that. But also just the bizarre counterexample of, okay, then, drop something and see if it doesn't fall.
Yeah.
Haven't you ever been to a birthday party? it just, like, think through what you're saying for half a second there, sir.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, they'll always find the dumbest level. Like, I just had a video where I said what I hoped would be a non-controversial. Science isn't the only thing that's important in life. Making scientific discoveries is not the only thing that's important in life. It's like, well, the guy gets out, well, you're using your computer and you use medicine. Did you claim that science? Like, jeez. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm saying it's not the only thing.
How does that prove God?
Yes. You're not proving God right now. I just boggle at the whole atheist concept. Even Sam Criss, I mentioned him before, but he's mocked the kind of a materialist scientific worldview, and that their whole, like, even their kind of like a weird kind of conception of virtue is that our job is basically to recapitulate the laws of nature before just succumbing to oblivion. I guess that's our noblest purpose, to find out what the laws are that govern us and state them and and then die. I guess, I don't know, or maybe when we get, you know, medicine and stuff, you know, and we can afford ourselves some level of comfort, so we'll have a really luxurious slide into oblivion. I think that's the ultimate, a very painless slide into oblivion. I think is the highest virtue of the human, you know.
Yeah, well, it's a really interesting point, because they never stand by any of anything they would hold up. Like, they'll hold things up as noble, and then the moment you push them, they won't stand by it. Yeah. But having said that, there is a really interesting thing very closely related to what you're saying, that and it forms something of an unfortunate gulf in language between Christians and atheists, because, you know, until relatively recently, we could talk to people, you know, like deists and so on, still understood the concept of natural law. They believed in such thing as human nature, and therefore there was, you know, good and bad according to, you know, what a human being actually is. And so we could discuss things like, you know, whether or not telling truth is good, or, you know, whether or not lying is bad. But the thing is, and like the modern atheists are, you know, by way of being materialistic with their, you know, the evolution uber alles is sort of attitude, is they're actually anti-teleological. That is to say, everything in, you know, 'cause the only reason we have the ability to feel pleasure of any kind whatsoever is because this is essentially a carrot that evolution uses to get us to make more descendants.
Yeah.
And so, but the thing about that is that, you know, for one thing, evolution doesn't care whether or not you're happy. And for another, just as a practical matter, the minimum amount of happiness necessary to get you to maximally make descendants is ideal, precisely because if you ever got more than that, you wouldn't, you know, if you got more happiness than the bare minimum necessary to get you to make a descendant, you may not make another one. You might be still enjoying the previous descendant too much. Or, you know, thing that kept you alive, or what have you. You know, like if you know, you don't feel hungry in time, you might not eat and then you'll starve. So you need to feel hungry again, etc. Yeah. The result being, nature doesn't care if we're happy, and it really actively wants to minimize the amount of pleasure that we get from any of its purposes wherein we make more descendants. Purposes, obviously, you know.
Yeah, non-teleological, yes.
Yeah. So the upshot is all real play, all happiness, maximizing your happiness means cheating nature as much as possible.
Yes.
Hence why, basically, sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah.
Are the three things in which, you're cheating nature as much as possible and make sure to not have any descendants because, man, they're a drag. So, keep from having descendants while you have as much sex as possible. And it's a pretty good drug because, a lot of the drugs are kind of hardcore and work too well, so you can overdose on them or screw up your life. So sex is a really good drug, actually, because it's sort of inherently self-limiting. You can't overdose on sex. You can't, there's that period wherein you don't want it for a while after having had it, and so therefore you've got some time to work, etc. So it's a really, really good drug, but it's not the only drug. There are other drugs that are relatively safe. And then
rock and roll.
Yeah, probably superhero movies these days is a better stand-in, but nonetheless, various things designed to stimulate your senses in ways that trick you into being happy, even though you shouldn't be in the circumstance from an evolutionary standpoint.
Yeah.
And then when none of that works, it's time to die with dignity so that you don't have to suffer.
Yeah.
And that is to them the highest good possible within their framework. And there is, unfortunately, nothing to, there's no compromise there.
Yeah.
There's no common ground between somebody who believes that something is actually good or anything is actually noble, or there could be such a thing as something worth sacrificing for.
Yeah.
And that, where all you can do is cheat death until you can't, and then
hopefully have a painless death. Yeah.
Sorry, what?
Hopefully have a painless death.
Well, exactly. Yeah, cheat death until you can't, and then cheat life.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, if you look, pretty much every culture across the globe has some conception of God. So if you're going to take purely an evo-psych a viewpoint of this, you're going to say, well, then there's an evolutionary reason why people believe in God. There's an evolutionarily advantageous reason people develop religions. So by what authority do the atheists tell us, no, we shouldn't do that?
Well, it fits in with their cheating
evolution.
evolution.
By what authority can you say, if religion makes someone happy, who are you to tell them if they're wrong? I mean...
Yeah, well, I mean, their theory is roughly that that religion being an evolutionary adaptation actually makes you less happy than you could be if you cheated on enough sexual partners while doing drugs and then kill yourself before you get too old. So because they're actually, despite the fact that they talk incessantly, especially Richard Dawkins, about evolution, in theory evolution is their enemy.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so in a sense, the new atheists are more than anything primarily, they view in theory they should view evolution primarily as an enemy. So whatever evolution wants is probably bad for you because the only thing it cares about is maximizing your descendants.
Yeah.
And so, since you care about yourself, not your descendants, it's your enemy. You should fight it as much as possible. And Dawkins even kind of said something like that, I think, about how, by being aware that our genes are selfish, we can then, fight against them and be generous.
Huh? Yeah.
Apparently there's something about... I saw it quoted when someone was saying, because Dawkins also said that, selfish is a metaphor. You could just as easily, substitute altruistic and you wouldn't have to change anything in the book. And the person was saying, well, that passage doesn't seem very amenable to just, doing a text substitution of selfish for altruistic.
Yeah.
But so that's why that passage kind of stands out to me. The God Delusion is a terrible book, by the way.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever read any of it.
No, I have. I know the center. That's why you said, the new atheism is dying down. No, the new atheism was dead on arrival because the centerpiece argument, I always point, because not even in the 10 years since the God Delusion was published, I've only had maybe 5 atheists try to tell me, try to basically describe what was intended as the centerpiece argument, the God Delusion. So either they're not aware of it or they have no faith in it, because this was what was going to sell the book. This was the entire centerpiece of his entire thesis, why God almost certainly does not exist. Don't you think that would be useful to have? If you could close the argument with why God almost certainly does not exist, wouldn't you want to use that? Wouldn't that be helpful in discussions with Christians and theists? But seriously, I've had fewer than a handful of atheists ever try to pry that on me.
I've never seen it. I had to go searching for it, actually, when I heard about it. I've never seen anyone try it.
Okay.
That's a good point. Although, frankly, I think it may be, much as I don't want to give I mean, I like to metaphorically say that Richard Dawkins is a man that has an IQ of 101.
Yeah.
That's to say he is very trivially above average. And
Jordan Peterson said, yeah, you're half smart. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I don't have any respect for the man's intellect. But having said that, I still think that his argument for why there's almost certainly no God is still too complex for the average internet atheist.
That's true.
It's got more than one step. That makes it kind of difficult for many of them.
But that's what you have to say to his credit. If you say nothing else about him, he tried.
Yes.
He tried to marshal an argument against God's existence. Now, what happens when you see things with the British press? There's a guy whose name I've been trying to think of, and I can't quite think of it. But you'll see it periodically. It's like, this is the new generation of new atheists. They're not like the old new atheists. This is the new generation. And they have they're more accommodating, and they're not like those angry, old, arrogant old atheists.
Huh.
But I wish I could remember the guy's name. But the thing is, their improvement is simply that they just assume atheism. They don't even try to demonstrate it. Yeah, you could be nice to me. You could not be a dick. But we're going to get to the point where, why do you believe what you believe? And no, I'm not going to let you condescend to me just because you assume something to be the case.
Yeah. It's funny. Like, I have respect.
It's exactly what it's becoming more beat up on atheists, which is not really what I had in mind with this, but go on.
Sorry. Well, actually, here's a nice turn. I actually have a fair amount of respect for atheists who will say, who will take the noetic approach and say that I look at the world, and this is clearly a world that does not have that does not have a God. Now, I take away a lot of that credit if they aren't willing to say, like, I look at the world and see that this is an evil world.
Yeah.
Because that's what that means. Like, this is a world not ordered towards the good. This is a chaotic world. This is a world in which whatever good there is will eventually come to an end because fundamentally evil will win and it will all turn out to naught, whether it's a giant explosion or, the heat death of the universe or what have you, but evil's going to win. So anyone who will actually do that, if they simply say, like, I don't have an argument for it, I simply look out on the world and this is what I see, and I know this to be the case, I respect that. Now, I also respect somebody who looks out in the world and says, like, well, obviously there's a God in charge of this. Neither one of those is an argument in favor of it, but I respect both of those as people willing to have a position. And, just because you can't articulate an argument for your position doesn't make the position illegitimate. So it's one of those really weird things I found. Like, the lack of belief atheists piss me off because they're so unwilling to have a position.
Yeah.
An atheist who's willing to have a position, I respect.
There is I think he might be Ben McLean, whatever his name. I think he said on Facebook something really interesting. But he said, I've had productive discussions with there is no God atheist. I've never had a productive discussion with I lack a belief in God atheist. And yeah. I think a big part of it is well, the obvious part of it is that the I lack a belief will never own their own premises. But I mean, I think as far as personality, it is that sense of false humility. They put up that front of false intellectual humility where they say, I don't pretend to have all the answers. I just and then you get to that point where you say, no, I don't have to prove that premise. So then they say, oh, well, again, this goes back to my video. It's like, well, provide me the evidence, and they swat it away. Well, what are they? They are the arbiter of all evidence.
Yes.
So that is a position of great intellectual arrogance.
Yeah, it is. I don't pretend to have all the answers. I just assume that I do.
Do you ever hear it? I love this. Oh God, because I got into it with this guy who wasn't an atheist, but he was kind of a liberal, and I was trying to describe to him why describing people who you disagree with as being anti-science and saying they don't believe in science is not a helpful strategy. And in my opinion, this whole dogmatism that has accrued around science in recent years is why things like flat eartherism is allowed to flourish. I think it's because of the fact that they're acting cultish. They're trying to shut out alternate viewpoints, and so yeah, I mean, if you don't want people thinking global warming is a conspiracy, don't act like global warming is a conspiracy, okay? I could not get through to him. It's like, no, well, clearly if you disagree with this, you don't believe in science, you're outside the... But that's kind of a digression for what I was going to say. But I like, when the atheists say, they have so much to unpack. I think they almost purposefully make it where if you were to unpack everything that was dumb in their sentences, you'd seriously need like half an hour. I think they almost do that by design. But atheists will say, I don't pretend to have all the answers. What I do know is that the story science gives us makes more sense than the story given to us by a bunch of Bronze Age goat herders. And so it's like...
Bronze Age goat herders.
So much to unpack. First off, science doesn't give us a story. Science gives us a lot of stories, many of which are in contradiction with one another. And none of which, even in principle, can be opposed to the premise that God exists. So, I mean, yeah. They throw out these kind of grandstanding comments where there's so much to unpack. It's I don't even want to bother.
Yeah.
And when you say I don't want to bother, well, great. You have to accept why I believe is true.
Yeah, the thing is, it's something I actually mentioned right at the very beginning. Like, my child gets mistaken for arguing with atheists more than a bit, but by both Christians and atheists. And sometimes on and I look at atheistic answers, but my critique them and so on. But
what was that you said?
Oh, sometimes I do look at like atheistic arguments and critique
cancer.
Them. No. I said atheistic answers. I said.
Oh, okay.
But like I look at atheism. I look at atheistic arguments and so on. So I look at these, but I'm not trying to argue with atheists in particular. I take a very different approach if I was, and I get mistaken for it. But in general, my actual approach, because I've argued with atheists on Twitter a bit. I know you like to you stick to Facebook. I stick to Twitter. But my approach in general is always, look, if you have a question, I will happily answer your question. It is in a sense it's a religious duty to answer questions that are put to me. But I can summarize the argument from Evil in argument I had with my friend about this when I finally realized that he wasn't a philosopher and gave him a simple answer. I spent like 10 years going down a rabbit hole of mistaking the sort of answer he needed, which was, the simple version is, how can God exist if there's so much evil in the world? My simple answer is that it is possible that God permits evil in order to bring about a greater good, such as, free will.
Which is the classical answer, yes.
And then I said, and I trust God that is in fact the case. And he said, well, I don't. I said, I know. Argument finished. I know you don't trust God. You asked me the question. I gave you the answer.
Yeah.
We're done. And so it's actually, I used the analogy with Max one time on a conversation a while ago. Like it's a bit like if somebody came up to me and said, hey, can you tell, on the street, somebody driving a car, pull up and, I'm, say mowing my lawn. It's like, hey, can you direct me to the Five Guys burger? And I say, yeah, sure. Go up the road, turn left, go 3 blocks down, turn right, and then it'll be on your right, about 2 blocks over. And then they say, prove it. Go ahead and get lost if that's what you prefer. You asked me a question, I gave you an answer. If you don't like my answer, don't listen to it. And that's the approach that I take, that like, for all that, and I do enjoy arguing, but at the same time, it does tend to boil down to, because there's always, some fundamental distinction. Like I will reject any argument that leads to the conclusion that God exists. I haven't seen that too much in that exact format. I know Eve, I forget whether you've ever met Eve, but Eve Canine, she's on Twitter.
I know who she is. We haven't had any great correspondence, no.
Okay, but anyway, she's mentioned, like, she's had like 4 or 5 people actually say that, like, if logic leads to the conclusion that God exists, I reject logic.
Yes.
And, like explicitly, like saying that outright. I've gotten more of that implicitly, but like, there's always some fundamental thing, like, well, okay, logic's great, but don't push it too far, because if it leads to a God, then you've pushed it too far. Okay, fine. You're not willing to follow the argument. Fine. Like,
yeah.
At the end of the day, like, that's your choice how you live. I'm not trying to mind control anybody.
Yeah.
Like that's not what an argument is. An argument's a way you can know something's true. It's not like wrestling somebody into a position and making them, instead of screaming uncle, screaming QED or something.
Yeah.
So it's, ultimately there is, there are a lot of interesting things to say about atheists or atheism, precisely because essentially at the end of the day, one values atheists. They're human beings. They're worthwhile. And therefore, their lives actually matter.
Which is very easy to lose sight of when you're in a position like I am and you're constantly debating them. You see them almost as cockroaches that need to be stamped out. Quite honestly, no. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like I'm a bad critic because I feel no agape love for these people. I consider them pests.
Yeah.
Quite honestly.
Well, it gets really, really tricky because, and this is the thing, like I've pointed this out because, especially on Twitter, in other places too, like I'm not always overly polite to people. And, Max is Max. And, he's a brawler. I mean, he's a conversational street brawler in many ways. And there are a lot of people for whom his approach is really, really helpful and really, really good. Essentially other street brawlers, basically. Yeah. Like they need to be dealt with on that level. And that's the level they understand. But it's come up and, I've gotten pushback. And I like to point out, this is somebody who is engaged in public blasphemy. Go and find me anywhere in the Bible you can ever see Christ being good, nice specifically. Loving is different than nice to public blasphemy. Go find me anywhere in history you can find any of the church fathers or any of the saints anywhere ever being nice to public blasphemy.
Nice is not a Christian value.
No, it really isn't. And in point of fact, a spoiler alert for those who haven't actually read any of the church fathers, they're not very mealy-mouthed about just how awful public blasphemy is.
Yeah.
This is men trying to lead other men into hell. This is evil. This is profoundly evil. And they don't, they're not nice about it.
Yeah.
So, so the one thing in fairness, it can be difficult, the lines between man and argument can blur. But at the same time, a lot of, there is always something of an implicit reliance on the man himself in an argument, because there's always that reliance on why would anybody bother listening to somebody? It's because you have some measure of trust that that person is worth listening to. Nobody, the crazy guy holding the cereal bowl up to his ear, getting his secret transmissions and shouting as he marches back and forth on the public square. No one listens to him. As he shouts about the, what the aliens are, telling him or something. Like the literally crazy guy, the guy who has a clear and obvious utter disconnect from reality. Like literally marching around,
Yeah,
it worked better in the days.
What the atheists would say in response to that? It's that religion poses an existential threat to mankind. So it is their duty to respond to you. Yes.
Yeah, and fine. I mean, it doesn't according to their principles. But leaving that aside for a moment, sure. Like I don't expect somebody who believes that I'm fundamentally wrong about the world to be happy with me publicly spreading what they believe to be a lie.
Yeah.
I don't expect them to be. Like there is, I mean, ironically, the thing about the atheists is even according to their principles, it doesn't really make much sense. I mean, okay, it's a Marxist principle. Other than Marxism, it doesn't make any sense to say that religion is an existential threat to what? Our slow slide into oblivion? I mean, we're all going to die anyway. We're all going to suffer anyway. Like, what the heck is the thing that
Our slide is the most luxurious, exquisite slide into oblivion you've ever seen.
Yeah, and because so aside from it not being like, I don't really object to atheists considering me their enemy because I am publicly defending Christianity. Yeah. Okay, fine. Like I don't, we disagree. We consider each other a problem. That's, we exist in a situation in which there is a detente. Neither of us can win, so we're going to be relatively decent to each other rather than shooting it out. But, you know, that doesn't mean we consider each other great. I don't expect anyone to consider me, you know, who thinks that I'm fundamentally wrong about the world and leading people into not having as much sex, drugs, and rock and roll as they possibly can to you know, consider me to be great for the world. Okay.
That's the thing. I look at these atheists. I don't think they're having a whole lot of sex, drugs, and rock and roll either, to be quite honest.
Well, and that's our fault, right?
Majority, but yes.
I mean, but you know, we're personally responsible for that, aren't we? Like, if it weren't for religion, they'd be having all that sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
I kind of think I kind of get like the sense how it's kind of like little boys, 8-year-old boys who talk about like how they love Lamborghinis and Ferraris and stuff, but in reality, the only people who drive them are like balding and fat middle-aged guys. It's one of those cruel facts of nature that like the people who have this worldview that supposedly grants them unlimited license for sexual freedom are also the ones least capable of exercising it.
That is fairly true, yes. Chesterton actually has a great poem about that.
What's that?
Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton has a wonderful poem about that. Oh, I can't remember the title of it. I might remember, but what was it? You know, if I had been a pagan, I'd have piled my pyre on high, and in a great red whirlwind gone roaring to the sky. But Higgins is a heathen and a richer man than I, and they put him in an oven just as if he were a pie. And there's a great one. If I had been a heathen, no, if I had been a pagan, I'd have driven my chariots forth. And actually, I'm sorry. There's a different one about the dance. Oh, the Song of the Strange Ascetic is what it's called.
Chesterton has written so much great stuff. I love his article. I Met the Superman.
Oh, that is
where he deflates that. He kind of deflates Nietzsche, and I mean, I have a measure of respect for Nietzsche, but yeah.
Yeah, no, Chesterton had a slight weak spot for Nietzsche, but in his defense, also there hadn't been any decent translations of Nietzsche. There had been like some translations that really like mangled what he meant on purpose, kind of at Chesterton's time. Sorry, just to read. Just 2 stanzas of it. If I had been a heathen, I'd have praised the purple vine. My slaves should dig the vineyards, and I would drink the wine. But Higgins is a heathen, and his slaves grow lean and gray, that he may drink some tepid milk exactly twice a day. If I had been a heathen, I'd have crowned Neaera's curls, and filled my life with love affairs, my house with dancing girls. But Higgins is a heathen, and to lecture rooms is forced, whereas aunts, who are not married, demand to be divorced. But it's true, as you said. Like, actually, I'm curious how much this is your experience. I've encountered a lot of people where I'm pretty convinced that what they're actually trying to do is be the next Christopher Hitchens. That like they really think of themselves kind of like they're new age of matadors. You know, where if they do really, really well in this debate and just tell me that my evidence isn't evidence really, really hard, that at the end they'll be awarded 2 ears and a Bible.
What was that again?
Just you know, like, you know, if they dodge every argument and then thrust home telling me that my evidence isn't evidence really, really well and with great precision, at the end of this, you know, at the end of this, they'll be awarded 2 ears and a Bible.
Well, that's the thing, is because when Christopher Hitchens died, there was a spot left open, and so not among internet atheists, I saw there were people actively jockeying for that seat at the round table. And Sean Carroll, and it's like, okay, you have Lawrence Krauss, and it's like public interest had decreased by then. But yeah. I think, again, I have a measure of respect for Christopher Hitchens. If you read the articles he wrote, I mean, I subscribe to Vanity Fair. I've read his articles. I mean, he was a worldly, cultured, kind of the old kind of model of British intellectual. He was kind of like this kind of boozy, world-weary figure. And I mean, to some degree, I mean, we could say that you know, G.K. Chesterton or C.S. Lewis were boozy and world-weary too. I mean, still kind of the British public intellectual, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's the best you know, person to make a logical argument against God. Do you have a
problem? He doesn't. I have a video about titled "Christopher Hitchens Isn't Serious," where I take his heaven is a celestial North Korea argument, and I take it apart sentence by sentence and show like no sentence followed from the sentence before it. by and large. Half the time, the end of the sentence didn't follow from the beginning of the sentence. It was not an argument in any sense. It was really a public entertainment. The one thing is, Chesterton loved beer, but he wasn't continually drunk.
Yeah.
Whereas Hitchens literally was continually drunk. He got drunk first thing in the morning and maintained it through.
Yes.
And it was, I actually maintain that for Hitchens, it was actually a performance-enhancing drug. Precisely because what Hitchens really traded on was his very boisterous and forceful personality, which came out of a bottle. Yeah. And I saw at one point he admitted that like none of this stuff actually mattered when he was sober. It wasn't interesting. What was the point? Yeah. When he was sober, when he was drunk, which was virtually all the time, it mattered.
Yeah.
It mattered precisely because he was drunk, not because it actually mattered. And so Hitchens is kind of a really curious thing in that regard, that his drinking is inseparable from his public persona.
Yeah.
Because it was.
And I mean, he's a contrarian. He's a gadfly. And so, I mean, he gets a charge from whether it's, making fun of like a publicly held figure like Jackie Onassis or something and slinging some arrows at her. God is just another thing to sling arrows at. I mean, it almost says very little about his feelings about it. He's just being a gadfly. He's being a contrarian.
Yeah, and in his defense too, he was great at turning phrases. He was really skilled at turning phrases. He had a beautiful voice to hear him speak too.
And he had a breadth of cultural knowledge at his disposal that you certainly don't see among the other four horsemen, and you certainly don't see among the internet atheists who hold him up as an idol. And that was going to go back to what I was going to say before, is he's such an unlikely idol for these little fedora kiddies who don't know anything about the world. Maybe they've seen some of the world in Grand Theft Auto or something. They know nothing about the world. They know nothing of culture. I don't think they're boozy at all. I don't think their mom allows them to bring it into the house, quite honestly. It always seems so ironic that they hold Christopher Hitchens in such regard. Yeah.
Yeah, in fairness, I mean, I've run across atheists who are married. I've run across them that
I'm going against stereotypes. Yes, I mean there are a lot of family men out there. Yeah, so I'm using mean stereotypes.
Yeah. No, that said, there is like this. Well, actually, one of my favorites was magician comedian Pendulette. Yeah, that a friend of mine quoted him as making some argument, because the argument for morality comes up, that if God is dead, all things are permitted, and the atheists scream at that, and
he makes the arguments that Christians don't really have authentic morality because we're all doing it under threat of force.
Oh right, yeah, I love that one. But Eddie, yeah, I've seen some other variants too. You're looking for a reward, etc. But the one I really liked though that I was thinking of was when he said something effective. Well, I've already murdered all the people that I want to murder. 0. And he says this as if he wants a medal for his lack of ambition. Yes. Okay, fine. You're just not very ambitious.
I love that of such. They think that like liberal indignation is more scary than the threat of hellfire itself. They scoff at us. And it's criminally easy to call their bluff. So are you really saying that if it wasn't for the threat of hell, you would go around murdering and raping? Just call their bluff. Say, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. What are you going to do about it? Right, so you're gonna make a cross expression at me, and that's supposed to scare me out of it?
Yes.
The only reason I'm not murdering and raping is because I'm afraid of hell. So what? Your disgust is supposed to scare me into not doing it?
Yeah, no, I've done that. Actually, being a serial killer sounds like it'd be a lot of fun. Yeah. I can't believe that.
Sure.
So let me get this straight. You think that it's absolutely terrible that I act on principle because it's my principle?
No.
Huh. Really? It's hilarious the degree to which I've seen this, and I mean, you can see it pushed into like the idea, that like all criminality is mental illness by definition, for example. Because human beings don't have free will, so if you do something bad, then by definition you're mentally ill. which isn't a very it leaves you with a completely useless definition of mental illness because it's entirely it can't distinguish between anything. It's just
we're gonna get to the point where you can't even call someone an asshole anymore because that'll be some diagnosable mental illness. And, it's like, no, they have to put a name on something. It's you can no longer make fun of a person for it. But yes, continue.
Yeah, but anyway, it's something I've noticed though. It carries through. A lot of people, a lot of the people I know who are atheists are remarkably. I don't want to call them sheep-like, but basically, well, at the end of the day, they're remarkably gentle, harmless people with incredibly modest ambitions in all parts of their life. Basically, they by instinct just conform to what's ever around them, and they seem to think that everyone does. Like, I don't know if you've run into this, but I've seen a bunch of this. Like, well, it doesn't really matter what you believe. Everyone acts the same anyway.
Yeah.
Which is obviously false. But in any event, occasionally they'll cite some bullshit statistics about how, like, everyone does everything in exactly the same proportion no matter what they believe. I don't know if you've seen that. I've gotten this one. The argument,
like adultery and all that stuff. I mean,
yeah, adultery, abortion, etc. That everyone does this in exactly the same statistical frequency, which isn't true. But in any event, yeah, I've seen that, and it does get to sort of what you're saying about how, like, in theory they should be out, boozing and sexing it up, etc. And they're not, and it seems like there's something about being a very timid person who just has no impulses but to, like, conform and fit in extremely well that sort of enables that sort of atheism. That, like, if you've got no temptations, and a lot of them don't understand this about morality too. Like, I'm sure you've seen this, the one where they think that, like, morality is a purely descriptive term. As an atheist, I can be good too. Yeah, of course. You can be good by freaking accident. You could be trying to kill somebody and accidentally, even though you thought this was a poison capsule, happen to give them their medicine that day. So what? Just because it's not impossible for you to do a good act. But they really don't understand that morality is about why you wouldn't do something that you want to do.
Yeah.
A lot of them have an odd mental block there. Like, well, but nobody wants to do anything bad. I've got a friend who works in the parole office in New York, and yeah, anytime he hears that one, he kind of it's a trigger. Let's put it that. It triggers him.
When you use the word descriptive, I kind of mentally tripped off on something because I had it with TMM, and he said, when we were talking about logic, he denies the existence of mind-independent logic. He thinks it's Platonism, completely philosophical, illiterate. But he says, well, logic is descriptive. It's not prescriptive. It's descriptive. Well, even if we grant that logic is descriptive, the whole point about being descriptive is that it describes something. It describes something outside of itself.
Yeah.
What is it? What is it descriptive of if logic has no exoteric reality at all?
I saw part of that. I couldn't. Speaking of cringy, and couldn't watch and turned it off. Like, shortly after that guy spoke for like the second time, I just couldn't take it anymore.
Well, see, the thing about that is all it's been like a year, and all I still get that. I still people. Oh wow, TMM totally punned you. He has like the most. He has like you could imagine, just like a bunch of like snotty little 13-year-olds jacked up on like Mountain Dew or something. That's just his fan. Oh wow, TMM totally punned you. He totally owned you. He destroyed you, man. It's like, like the kind of triumphalist language that gamers use. It's always, I completely destroyed you. That is exactly what they bring to it. I just imagine as a bunch of little hyped up little gamer kiddies or something. But but my response, because I can't just take the last video he gave me and just put it into my video editor and just respond to that, because I'm going to have to go back 6 videos to pick up every thread he dropped. It's going to be a horrible, boring, excruciating exercise for me, but I'm gonna get around to doing it eventually.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the gaming connection language, because it really is interesting. Like, I think. Oh, the connection to gaming language.
Oh, okay.
That and this is something I think that anyone who's Christian on the internet probably at this point has
That sounds bad. That sounds bad. I'm a Christian on the internet. I play one on the internet, but yeah.
I just mean who is a Christian and is on the internet and known to be one. So you get people who are clearly thinking they're in some sort of game. Yeah. I mean, like, I had one guy recently who misunderstood what I was saying, didn't understand as I was trying to explain to him that he misunderstood what I was saying, and then at some point was like, come on, man, stop trying to dodge it. Just take the L and move on. L standing, I believe, for loss. At least I assume so. And it was this utterly bizarre experience. Like, okay, look, let me clarify. You're an idiot. You have no idea what I just said. You're completely misunderstanding it. And it was a strange experience of that language, you know, just take the loss and move on.
Yeah.
Is there some cash prize no one told me about? Were we in the running for something?
I'm just imagining like for them it's like Call of Duty and you have all your weapons lined up on the left. It's like special pleading fallacy. Wing! Special pleading fallacy. It's like just throw that out there. That's your weapon. Google search.
Sometimes they make up fallacies too. I was actually
honestly. I'm sorry. I don't want to cut you off, but since my last video mentioned Joseph Stalin, and you could say that Google is gaming their search results to give preference. But if you search like Stalin anti-religious violence in Google, the first entry in Google is a Michael Shermer article called the atheist atrocities fallacy. So now that's a reference. Atheists have that in their back pocket now. Whenever anyone accuses the greatest atrocities of history, which is a fact, have been done by atheist regimes, they now have that in their back pocket. Oh, you're just using the atheist atrocity fallacy. So yes, thank you, Michael Shermer, for letting all the atheists sleep well at night. Knowing that he can square away, and that's always I see people come up to their atheist gurus. I don't want you to forget what you're talking about. They go up to their atheist gurus and say, "Oh, just to use one example I saw, can you debunk Jordan Peterson for me?" So I think they're wholly uninterested in the actual content of the debunking. They just want that knowledge that their atheist guru has addressed it, and so the matter is settled. It doesn't actually matter what he said about it. It's been debunked, so you know their conscience can rest at ease.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I was just going to mention that I was talking with one guy who showed up on Twitter, and his avatar is Richard Dawkins, and he said something or other, and I mentioned something about like, so by the way, why is it that you know, I'm sorry to give the context. It was one of those like I had likened to I mentioned something about like muting some people, and he said something about how not now, and he had said something about I'm sorry, rather it's that muting them is not like trying to live in my hug box or, you know, to try to get into you know, into my echo chamber, but rather it's more like if somebody's urinating on my shoes, walking away. And I said, by the way, why is it that you people think that it's so much more valuable to talk to you than, say, to read Nietzsche?
Yeah.
And then he said something about like, well, how do you know that I'm an atheist? Like, I don't know, Richard, call me psychic. No, actually, to tell you the truth, it's the scientific method. See, I made a theory that people with Richard Dawkins avatars are atheists. And then I went and I went and got some evidence. I checked Richard Dawkins' account. He has a Richard Dawkins avatar. And then I went to see if I could falsify it. I checked my account. Not an atheist. Don't have. Get out of here now. Go now. Sorry. Yeah. And then, you know, I checked my account. No Richard Dawkins avatar. Not an atheist. So there we go. Yeah. It's my theory is now a fact, which I then used to know that you're an atheist. And his response was, hasty generalization fallacy, but nice try.
The irony was completely lost on him.
Yes. That I don't entirely understand how he missed that I was joking there.
Yeah.
But also, I just love that he made up the hasty generalization fallacy.
I've actually seen that before. To his credit, I think all their bullshit made up things that they actually have a common reference for made up.
Really? Because I checked yourfallacyis.com and it wasn't there. I thought that was their holy book.
Google search. Do your Google search.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
I just want to say there's another guy who keeps pestering me to make a response, and what's his name? Oh yeah, this guy, deconverted man. Thank God no one's going to get this deep into the conversation, so I can't use any of this information against me. His name is Deconverted Man.
I've run into him.
Okay, his avatar is a cartoon of it. First off, if you're a guy and your avatar is a cartoon of yourself, you're already pretty suspect. I mean, if you're a girl and you have a cartoon of yourself, I guess it could be kind of cute. But his avatar is him, man. Because he's a skeptic. He's shown with one eyebrow arched because he's so skeptical.
I did a video. He gave me a debate challenge.
Yes.
It was bizarre. I did a video about his debate challenge, just how ridiculous it was, including one of them being, what is the etymology of God? And I point out, you can look this up in a dictionary. How is that a debate question? But in his response video, he filmed himself like this.
Yes.
And he knows that he was doing that because at one point he went like this. So you could see his entire face, then retreated to doing the rest of his video like that. Yes, I've run into him. Anyway, unfortunately, I have to get going.
Oh, okay.
But thanks so much for having me on. It's great to be talking with you.
This has been a pleasure. I've quite enjoyed this. So thank you, Christopher Lansdown. Subscribe to his channel, Missing the Mark. And this has been my 1K sub special. Thank you.
Hey, and congratulations on 1,000 subscribers, man. I love your stuff.
It might be 1,200 by the time this gets up, but yes.
Cool. Hey, and just let me say, you're going to put your Patreon link in here, right?
Yes.
Anyway.
I have to props to Christopher. He's been my patron for a while. Props to my 2 cents, the channel 2 cents. He's given me he's become a patron. It's greatly appreciated. And I'm a very light load because when I make stupid death metal videos, I don't even bother charging you guys for that, okay? So I'm a light load on my patrons, but thank you guys.
Yeah, so let me just throw that plug in there that, people should join us because I love your stuff.
Thank you.
Have a good night and God bless.
You too. God bless.